When you hear the word betrayal, you probably imagine an enemy, a rival, or someone distant who never really cared about you in the first place. But the truth is, the deepest pain never comes from the outside. It comes from those we trust, those we help, those we bring into our personal world. And in today's story, the betrayal didn't come from a stranger, it came from inside the house. It came from a servant named Ziba, a man who stood close to Mephibosheth, ate with him, served with him, walked with him, and pretended to care about him. Yet at the very moment Mephibosheth needed him most, Ziba became the one who robbed him, deceived him, and used his vulnerability for personal gain. But before we reach the betrayal, we need to understand how this story began, because Mephibosheth wasn't just anyone. He was the grandson of King Saul and the son of Jonathan, a man David loved like his own soul. In many ways, Mephibosheth was a living reminder of David's promise, David's loyalty, and David's heart to honor a covenant even after Jonathan was gone. Yet Mephibosheth's life did not start strong. At the young age of 5, when news came that his father and grandfather had died in battle, he was picked up by a nurse in a panicked attempt to escape danger. In her rush, she dropped him. That tragic fall left the boy permanently crippled in both feet. He grew up hiding in a remote place called Lodebar, a dry and barren land, far from the palace and far from the life he was born into. Now imagine this, the rightful heir to a royal bloodline, once meant to walk the halls of a palace, now living in obscurity, unable to walk without difficulty, forgotten by the world, and probably convinced that nothing good would ever come his way again. That was Mephibosheth's world. It was dark, it was difficult, and it felt hopeless. Until one day, King David remembered. Not by accident. Not out of guilt. But out of love. He remembered the covenant he made with Jonathan to show kindness to his family forever. And that moment changed Mephibosheth's life. When the king called for him, Mephibosheth must have trembled, not knowing whether David wanted to show kindness or judgment. But David didn't rise from his throne to condemn him. Instead, he rose to restore him. He gave him back all the land that once belonged to his grandfather Saul, and he invited him not as a guest, not as an outsider, but as a son to eat at the king's table every day for the rest of his life. In a single moment, God restored everything Mephibosheth lost. It was a beautiful story of grace, mercy, and covenant loyalty. But it was also the moment Ziba's story began. Ziba had been a servant in the house of Saul. He knew the lands. He knew the value. And now, by David's decree, he and his sons were commanded to work the land for Mephibosheth. He was entrusted with everything needed to rebuild the estate: resources, manpower, and responsibility. At first, it might have seemed like a blessing to Ziba. He had a place. He had purpose. He had a role in royal service again. But something dangerous began growing in his heart. Maybe it was greed. Maybe it was jealousy. Maybe it was resentment that a crippled man was now the master of wealth and land while he, a strong and capable servant, had to labor for someone he believed was beneath him. Whatever it was, a seed of bitterness took root. And that seed found its opportunity years later when King David faced a rebellion led by his own son, Absalom. David was forced to flee Jerusalem in a hurry. He didn't have time to gather supplies or organize support. And in those desperate moments, people's true loyalties began to show. Some abandoned him. Some stayed faithful. And some saw it as an opportunity to gain something for themselves. Ziba was one of those people. As David climbed the Mount of Olives, tired, heartbroken, barefoot, and grieving the betrayal of his son, Ziba appeared before him with donkeys loaded with food and supplies. It looked like a generous act, a loyal gesture. It looked like Ziba was coming to help the king in his hardest hour. But behind that gift was a motive that had nothing to do with loyalty and everything to do with taking advantage of the moment. David asked the obvious question, "Where is your master's grandson?" Ziba didn't hesitate. He didn't stutter. He didn't blink. He lied. He said Mephibosheth stayed in Jerusalem, hoping to reclaim the throne of his grandfather. It was a devastating accusation. It painted Mephibosheth as ungrateful, ambitious, and disloyal. And David, hurt, exhausted, and struggling under pressure, believed him. Without hesitation, David made a rash decision. He gave all of Mephibosheth's land to Ziba. In that moment, Ziba got everything he always wanted: wealth, power, control, influence. And he got it by stepping on the reputation of a loyal, disabled man who had done nothing but honor the king. This is where the pain of betrayal becomes real. Mephibosheth, who couldn't even saddle his own donkey without help, was accused of abandoning David. A crippled man, who relied completely on others for mobility, was accused of running off to chase a crown that he didn't even desire. The bitterness of betrayal wasn't just in the lie, it was in the fact that Ziba used Mephibosheth's weakness against him. He used the very thing Mephibosheth couldn't control as proof of guilt. When the rebellion ended and David returned, the truth finally came out. Mephibosheth came to meet the king. His clothes were unwashed. His beard was untrimmed. He had not cared for his feet, his appearance, or anything else from the day David left until the day David returned. This wasn't the behavior of a man who was chasing a throne. This was the behavior of a man grieving the king he loved, day and night, without comfort. And when David asked him why he didn't go with him, Mephibosheth told the truth that Ziba had betrayed him, left him behind, and lied to the king. But even with the truth finally exposed, the damage had already been done. When David finally returned to Jerusalem after Absalom's rebellion, he walked back not just as a king reclaiming his throne but as a man who had been wounded by betrayal after betrayal. His own son turned against him. His trusted advisors abandoned him. And at the top of that list stood Ziba, the servant who lied to gain power and took advantage of a disabled, loyal man. So when Mephibosheth approached the king broken, unkempt, and visibly distressed, it wasn't simply a moment of explanation. It was a moment of revealing hearts. David saw him and immediately sensed that something didn't match Ziba's story. A man chasing after a throne does not refuse to wash, groom, or care for himself for weeks. A man hungry for power does not fall before a king with trembling humility. A man who seeks to overthrow a kingdom does not weep like someone who has lost everything. So when David asked what happened, Mephibosheth spoke with honesty and vulnerability. He said, "My lord the king, my servant deceived me." Every word carried the weight of pain. Not anger. Not revenge. Not hatred. Just pain. He explained how Ziba left him behind, took the donkey he needed, and used the moment to paint him as a traitor. He told David how powerless he felt, unable to follow because of his disability and completely dependent on someone who used that dependence to betray him. Imagine the emotional weight of that moment. Not only was Mephibosheth innocent, but he had been loyal in the deepest way possible. While others fled, plotted, or waited to see who would win the throne, Mephibosheth mourned David's absence non-stop. He ate nothing special. He washed nothing. He celebrated nothing. He lived in sorrow until the king returned. And now the truth was out, but what would David do? This is where the story becomes complex. David believed Ziba's lie because he was exhausted and desperate in the moment. He made a decision that wasn't fair, and now, seeing Mephibosheth's condition, he felt the tension of choosing justice while still navigating a kingdom recovering from war. David couldn't simply undo everything. The land had already been promised. The political situation was fragile. The people were watching his every move. And in that tension, he made a decision that leaves many readers confused. He said to Mephibosheth and Ziba, "You and Ziba divide the land." It was a compromise. Not perfect. Not fully just. But in the moment, it was what David decided would keep peace. And here is where Mephibosheth's heart shines brighter than any land, wealth, or reward ever could. Instead of protesting. Instead of fighting. Instead of demanding fairness. Instead of exposing Ziba even more. Mephibosheth simply said, "Let him take it all. I am just glad the king has returned safely." Those words reveal the soul of a man transformed by grace. He had once been forgotten. He had once lived in fear. He had once believed he was nothing. But when David showed kindness and brought him to the king's table, Mephibosheth's identity changed forever. He was no longer defined by his disability. No longer defined by his past. No longer defined by what he lost. He was defined by the king's kindness. And because of that, land didn't matter. Wealth didn't matter. Reputation didn't matter. All he wanted was the king's presence. His devotion wasn't to a throne, or to influence, or to property, it was to relationship. That response struck David's heart deeply. It showed him that Mephibosheth never valued royal status or material comfort. What he valued was loyalty, love, gratitude. The covenant relationship between him and David was worth more than any estate. And in that moment, Mephibosheth stood taller despite his crippled feet than any king, warrior, or servant in the entire land. But the story doesn't end with the distribution of land. It ends with a lesson that echoes through time. Ziba's betrayal teaches us that sometimes the people closest to us can hurt us the most. Sometimes the betrayal isn't from the outside, it's from the person who knows your weakness, your routines, your vulnerabilities. Ziba used Mephibosheth's limitations against him. He used opportunity for selfish gain. He used his position to twist the truth. And in doing so, he lost something far more valuable than wealth or land. He lost integrity. Ziba walked away with property, but at the cost of his honor. Mephibosheth, on the other hand, walked away with peace. He chose a heart free from bitterness. He chose humility over entitlement. He chose relationship over revenge. And most importantly, he showed what it means to trust God even when humans fail you. His life teaches us that we cannot control what others do, but we can control how we respond. And a heart aligned with God does not need revenge to feel restored. David's role in the story reminds us that even good leaders make imperfect decisions. Even wise people can be misled in moments of pressure. Even those closest to God can believe a lie when they are tired, afraid, or overwhelmed. But God still works through their hearts, and in the end, David's tenderness toward Mephibosheth helped reveal the beauty of true humility. But the greatest message of the story is this: God sees the truth even when people lie about you. Ziba lied. David believed it. Mephibosheth suffered for it. But God allowed the truth to come out in time. Sometimes vindication is not instant. Sometimes people misunderstand you. Sometimes betrayal damages your reputation temporarily. But if you remain faithful, humble, and close to God, He will restore what truly matters. Mephibosheth's greatest restoration was not land, not wealth, not status. It was the restoration of relationship, honor, and truth. And what about Ziba? Scripture quietly closes his story after this moment. He fades into the background. He gained property but lost purpose. He gained land but lost legacy. Because betrayal, even when it succeeds for a moment, never succeeds in the end. In contrast, Mephibosheth's legacy continues as a testimony of humility, resilience, and loyalty. His story teaches us that true strength is not physical. It's not political. It's not financial. True strength is the strength of the heart. A strength that chooses peace over revenge. A strength that chooses trust over fear. A strength that chooses relationship over riches. So as we end this story, let this message stay with you. Betrayal may come from within. Lies may come from those closest. Wounds may come from unexpected places. But God sees. God knows. And God restores.